In the critical seconds after rapper Biggie Smalls was shot in Los Angeles in 1997, the best opportunity to catch his killer slipped away when his label's security team that night hesitated before giving chase. But someone did chase after the shooter, and in the days that followed, detectives interviewing members of Biggie's entourage got a clear picture of that chase that had ensued.
How far did you travel down Wilshire Boulevard?
I want to say 3 blocks at the most.
3 blocks.
But years later, it seems that a different story emerged, one told by Puffy's bodyguard that night named Gene Deal. So this is what I hope will be the definitive story on the chase that happened. And I think the details are gonna surprise you.
By the time he turned back around, we got there, everybody was gone. So you never saw the suspect from? No.
Biggie was killed by a lone gunman who fired from the driver's seat of a mid-1990s Chevy Impala as Biggie's GMC Suburban approached the intersection of Fairfax and Wilshire in Los Angeles. Big was seated in the front passenger seat, and his vehicle had just pulled out of the parking garage of the Peterson Automotive Museum after attending a music industry party there that night. And in order to understand what happened in the seconds that followed the shooting, we have to understand where all the witnesses were situated at that moment. In front of Biggie's vehicle, another Suburban was carrying Puffy, and it was pulling through the intersection as the shooting happened. And among the other people that were with Puffy in his vehicle was Gene Deal, his bodyguard, who was seated directly behind him in the back seat, and another associate named Anthony Jacobs, who was in the back third row of seats. And of all the people that were in Puffy's vehicle, Jacobs in the way back was in the best position to see the shooting behind them out that rear window. As the shooting happened, the only other vehicle that was officially part of their entourage was a Chevy Blazer that was driven by an off-duty cop named Reggie Blaylock from the Inglewood Police Department. And seated next to him was Paul Offord, who was the head of Bad Boy Records security. At the moment the shooting happened, they were still back near the exit of the parking garage because Offord had been out on foot, kind of directing traffic and helping the vehicles get out, and had just gotten back into the Blazer when the shooting happened up the block. Officer Blaylock will claim later that they were only 25 feet behind Biggie's vehicle when the shooting happened. But I think they must have still been back by the garage entrance, which is considerably farther back down the block, based on the fact that Offord had just climbed back into the Blazer, and that's when the shooting happened, when Offord was still climbing into the car and hadn't even closed his door yet.
Paul's walking back to the car. He walks back to the car, gets in, and I know he has his door open. It looks like he's about to put his seatbelt on. And I heard the shots ring out. Boom, 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 boom.
And at that very same moment, as they're about to start going forward to catch up, another vehicle cut in front of them. And Offord would claim it was a white SUV, but Officer Blaylock claimed it was a white car or a white limousine. And the party had just been shut down by the fire department. Everyone was trying to leave at the same time.
There was a white car in front of me. I don't know what kind of white. I know it was a white car. It could have been a stationary. I know it was a white car. All I saw was the front end turned in front of my car.
Biggie's driver, Gregory G. Money Young, told detectives what happened the moment the shots rang out up the street.
He reached over and he said, "Damn, baby boy, you back." You know what I'm saying? Like, you back. You know what I'm saying? And that's what we was talking about. And that was the conversation going on when Big looked, like Big looked. And then I looked to see what he was looking at. And all I heard was the shots ringing out. Okay.
Biggie is hit 4 times, and his friends don't know it yet, but he has been fatally wounded, and he only has minutes to live. In Puffy's Suburban, which is still driving forward through the intersection, Gene Deal claims he's armed, and he allegedly tries to jump out of the vehicle, but their driver, Ken Story, who's the head of the local security company that they've hired, is driving too fast, so Deal is unable to jump out. And within seconds, the shooter flees the scene, turning right onto Wilshire Boulevard and flooring it in that very powerful Chevy Impala. which really leaves the security blazer, which is back down the block still, as the only vehicle that is in a position to give immediate chase. But for some reason, Officer Blaylock hesitates. And this is what he'll tell detectives later.
I'm playing it off like shit. I'm not gonna chase nobody. Hell, I'm not about to get in no shit. And actually, I didn't. When he took off, he was gone. That's why I knew it had to be an SS Impala. It had to be an SS Impala.
He's not wrong. Those mid-90s Impalas were true muscle cars with powerful V8 engines, and the 80-foot wide Wilshire Boulevard might as well have been a drag strip. None of the SUVs in the entourage could have kept up with it. But then, possibly at the urging of Paul Offord, the security blazer suddenly takes off in pursuit of the gunman, and both Offord and Blaylock will tell detectives later that they chased after the shooter.
How far did you travel down Wilshire Boulevard?
I want to say 3 blocks at the most.
3 blocks. Either way, looking north and south, you didn't see the suspect.
I didn't see. I mean, whoever was gone. He was gone.
And there were other witnesses as well. Aisha Foster was the girlfriend of Biggie's good friend Damian Butler, and she knew who Paul Offord was, and she was crossing Fairfax on foot with friends of hers, walking behind Biggie's vehicle when the shooting happened, and she confirmed that she saw Offord's vehicle drive away eastbound on Wilshire Boulevard as if to chase someone or a car. And Damian Butler, who was in the back seat of Biggie's Suburban, would tell detectives that later that night, Offord told him that he and Blaylock had chased after the shooter.
No, I know the security car that was behind us said they lost the car. Said they tried to chase the car, but they lost it, or whatever.
And it's true that as Blaylock and Offord swung around the corner onto Wilshire, the Impala had already disappeared. A city bus driver who's coming the other way down Wilshire will claim he saw the Impala take its first left off of Wilshire onto a street called Ogden.
He's going to go this way. The MTA bus driver's going to see him.
Right there.
He watches him in his rear view mirror. He goes this way. He makes a left on Ogden. So it goes this way. Here's the Museum of Art, and it goes on Ogden.
That left turn is no longer possible today due to the expansion of the LA County Museum of Art over that section of the street. It is now the famous art installation Urban Light. And it's wild to think that Biggie's killer escaped through what is now the most photographed spot in all of Los Angeles.
Once it makes that turn, though, there's no witnesses that say anything else after
No, once it makes this turn, we have no idea. We have no idea at all. Now, of course, you do know this. If you turn left here, you're going to go back to Fairfax. Doesn't strike me that that's what the guy would do.
Okay.
If you did a shoot on Fairfax, you're not going to go back to Fairfax, right? The cops are going to be coming.
Blaylock and Offord drive several blocks down Wilshire Boulevard, passing Ogden, where unbeknownst to them, the shooter has already turned, and then they give up and return to the scene of the shooting.
What did you do then, after that?
I came back around. By this time, I guess those guys had maybe pulled in the intersection, and they said Biggie was shot.
Did anybody else at the scene that you know of pursue these shooters?
No, not that I know of.
Back in Puffy's Suburban, in those first few moments as the shots rang out and the Impala escaped, this is what happens next, according to what Gene Deal would tell detectives in his early interviews in those first days and weeks that followed.
And you hear the shot going, bow, and our driver speed up. And then we told him to stop the car. Now, he's making a 3-point U-turn. So he makes that right. Now, I'm facing the other way. You know what I'm saying? Then he backs up, and I'm on the opposite side now. And then we turn back around, the car was gone.
Okay.
So according to him back then, the Impala was already long gone by the time Puffy's Suburban got back to the scene. And he tells the same story in another interview with detectives that was also back in 1997.
Tried to open the door, but I couldn't. You know what I'm saying? Because he was going fast and everything. And then we heard someone say, bow! Then instead of Kenny stopping, he punched down on the gas. Again. And then we heard someone say, bow, 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 bow. By the time he turned back around, we got there. Everybody was gone. So you never saw the suspect from? No. Tone saw it. Tone was saw it.
Adding additional evidence to the claim that it was the security blazer that chased after the shooter and not some other vehicle, in the home video that was filmed from down the street in the moments after the shooting, you can see Biggie's Suburban sitting at the intersection and what appears to be Puffy's Suburban parked crossways in front of it, like forming a T. But the blazer is nowhere to be seen, ostensibly because it's gone chasing after the shooter. And that's really the story of the brief chase for Biggie's killer. Or is it? From what I can tell, it was several years later that bodyguard Gene Deal began telling the story that he and someone he refers to as Tone, who I believe was Anthony Jacobs, are the guys who actually chased after the shooter. And this alternate version of events is in an interview that he actually gave to detectives 4 years later in 2001.
Tone jumped in the driver's seat. I jumped in the passenger seat. We trying to chase the guy.
Is anybody else chasing him?
No.
Paul's vehicle's not chasing him?
No.
So when you guys get back,
Me and Tone jump in the car. We chased the guy down the street.
could you still see him as he's driving away?
We could see the guy.
Okay.
It was crazy. We could see him. Tone is a nut behind the wheel. And then the guy just, like he got on the
Did he make a
interstate.
right, left turn?
That's what I'm saying.
Did he go
He came this way, and then he went that way.
Which way? This way or that way?
He came this way, and he drove down some way. We was chasing him, and then he did a right turn and got on the interstate. He was gone.
So he went east on Wilshire and then made a right turn on a street and got away.
Yeah.
Did you guys try to catch him? You couldn't catch him?
Couldn't catch him, because that vehicle won't go over 100.
So did you guys make a right turn on the street that he made a right turn on?
We made a right turn, then we made another right turn. He was out of there.
He was gone. So when you made the right turn, he was gone?
Yep, then we just came back.
Okay.
I have no idea if that's the first time that story came out, if it came out sooner than that. I just know it seems to contradict what was said back in 1997. And if Jacobs was driving, I also don't see anywhere in his police interviews where he claims he chased after the shooter. And Deal's claim that they lost the shooter when he turned onto an interstate is also difficult to believe, considering the closest freeway to the scene of the crime is the I-10, which is 2 miles away, and to the south while the shooter was fleeing to the east.
Because it's a highway over this way or something, right?
Well, this is a big street.
Yeah, but don't it turn into a highway? Like you could do a right turn to get onto a highway?
Nah.
And in a later version of this story told on YouTube, Deal claimed that they actually lost the gunman at the top of a hill.
So we could see the guy at the top of the hill. Oh, it was a top. We see the guy up at the top where he had to make, when he made a right. When he made that right turn, when we got up to the top of the hill, we ain't see shit.
But this is the neighborhood where Biggie was shot. I've lived there for years. It is flat. There are no hills for miles in any direction. And I don't know the reason for these apparent discrepancies. Back in 1997, I honestly feel like Gene Deal was the most helpful and the most eager to help the detectives. I just think none of the witnesses in Biggie's entourage had the key to solving this murder. People's memories do fade with time, and it can be easy to create a false memory. And that may be what happened here, because as Biggie's friends realized they needed to get him to the hospital, there was a reshuffling of who rode in each vehicle. Ken Story, who had been driving Puffy's Suburban, now takes over Biggie's, ostensibly because G Money Young, who had been driving it, was from New York, while Story is local and should have a better idea of how to get to the nearest hospital. Puffy and others also climb in with Biggie, but back in the Suburban that Puffy had been riding in originally, Anthony Jacobs, who had been in that third row of seats, takes over as the driver. And I believe that he is joined by a producer in their group named Stevie J and Gene Deal. And that part lines up with what Deal said about chasing the gunman, that Tone was driving. But no one is chasing the shooter at this point. They're just trying to get Biggie to the hospital.
We're in the car right now. We're rolling to the hospital right now. I don't know. I'm not from here. I'm from New York.
Listen, is the party that was shot in your car?
No.
Okay, you said you're going to the hospital?
The car right in front of me.
What hospital are you going to?
I don't know. I'm not from here.
Let's go, man. You posted.
But then Biggie's entourage makes a mistake. As they leave the intersection to rush him to the hospital, they go the wrong way. Cedars-Sinai is the closest emergency room, and it's to the northwest. But Biggie's entourage drives east down Wilshire, with Biggie's Suburban in the lead. And they're actually going the same direction that Biggie's killer had fled just minutes earlier. And I'm sure that Deal and probably others are looking out for the shooter's car as they follow Puffy's Suburban down Wilshire. I would be. But the shooter would have been long gone by then. No one can see him. After driving a few blocks down Wilshire, Biggie's entourage suddenly realizes they are going the wrong way. And they course correct, and they do get Biggie to the hospital, where he is eventually declared dead. And doctors will claim that he likely died within minutes of being shot, so I don't think his entourage driving the wrong way initially made any difference in whether he survived or didn't. And at the end of the day, Biggie's murder was just a well-executed, gang-style drive-by shooting, the likes of which were happening on a near daily basis in the LA area back then.